Hello and welcome to the Knowing Show. I am your host, Christene Marie. Tonight we are diving into this question of where can I really belong? And this concept of belonging is something that I guess, kind of started exploring by way of reading a book called Daring Greatly by Dr. Brene Brown. And I read this, gosh, I guess 6 years ago at this point, 5.5, 6 years ago. And she talked about how our greatest human need has to do with belonging and basically being loved and belonging with a community, with a group. And we've seen this with so many different studies throughout time around children really needing that sense of belonging and the connection with their mothers and their caretakers. And then we've seen it from even, my light went out. And then even the way that people experience social rejection and how that impacts the brain in a really specific way that mirrors and kind of patterns the way that we process physical and more so the traumatic in the bodily sense. And so it's really interesting when you start studying the brain. I guess I just won't have a light tonight. When you start studying the brain and start seeing the impact of how our bodies respond to the physical world around us on an emotional level, and how much community and connection have to do with that, and how they directly relate to and pertain to our well-being on an emotional level, suddenly we start examining different parts of our life in a different way. Whereas we're looking at community maybe as something just a nice to have, or maybe even like kind of like me when I was growing up, I viewed community as simply some group or some community environment that is for me to give to. Like, these people are for me to serve and love on and give, rather than something that actually restores my soul and something that I fundamentally need. And so as I started realizing this, that it's a core human need to have connection, to have belonging, I started realizing how much that need in me for so many years I had just kind of been ignoring and viewed as a weakness. So my desire to have connection and have it be reciprocated was something that I had just been silencing for so many years. And it was interesting. I was hearing a father talk to his sons a couple weeks ago, and the sons were basically asking their dad, what made you choose marrying mom? And I was listening to the dad share with his sons about how he was really looking for somebody to take care of, somebody to give to. And at the time, he wasn't looking for a reciprocal relationship. It's like when you've got, you've got you're looking for the right electrical socket to fit your type of, I guess, whatever you call it, that you're going to stick into the electrical socket, the plug. And it was interesting because I was watching the boys' wheels turn as they heard this, that there's a difference between looking simply to give, but also then looking to receive. And one of the boys started talking about one of his friends, we'll call him Sam. And he was saying, Sam, he's not really actually a reciprocal friend. And he started talking about how in this one particular dynamic, he gave his friend all of these credits on a video game. And then his friend ended up using up all the credits, using up all the lives, and then just completely quit the game altogether. And you could tell that the little boy actually hadn't yet processed how that impacted him. It was costly to him to take all those credits from his own game. It was expensive. He had worked hard for them, and then he gave them to his friend, and his friend effectively squandered it. And so his son was learning from his father about how, yes, it is good to give in relationships, but it is also so important that we have relationships in our lives where we are receiving in return. But the thing that's interesting about that is that to receive, we actually need to be open to receiving in the first place. And there's a vulnerability there. There's a vulnerability in kind of opening up and saying, I welcome you into my heart, or I welcome you in to be able to influence me or speak to me or encourage me. And so in that vulnerability, we actually then also are exposing ourselves to also get hurt. Because once we've received something, now it can be taken away. And so with this concept of, well, where do I belong? there's this very, very vulnerable question that sits in front of us of if we need belonging, and that's so critical and important for our survival and for joy, for us to have reciprocal relationships where we're not just giving, but it's a two-way street. Now we do find that there's something to lose, and there's something very vulnerable in constantly looking outward to find our sense of meaning, to find our sense of belonging out there. And so, as I was looking at today's lesson, for those of you who are new to the Knowing Show, we've been reading through A Course in Miracles on a daily basis this year. And today we're actually in the middle of a review section. And the section is, or I guess the lesson that we're reviewing is lesson 189, where it says, I will be still an instant and go home. And there's only 2 lines that follow. Why would I choose to stay an instant more where I do not belong when God himself has given me his voice to call me home? And what's so interesting as I was reading this was that, man, we really have this very delicate line to walk as human beings, and also as brothers and sisters, and as people who are effectively not of this flesh and blood. Like, this physical body is not the end of the story. I do have a spirit and you have a spirit. And so there's this concept of I am of this physical world, and I am looking for this semblance of belonging, and I am intended to have community here in the world, and we need each other for survival. Even just the Stanford study that babies were literally being fed by their mothers, and then their mothers were cooing and looking down at the baby and engaging with them, and the children were actively eating in return. And then as the study went, the mom stopped doing that. And she didn't go cold or mean, but she just completely went neutral. And instantly the baby stopped drinking the milk and started searching to make eye contact with their mothers, and then started fussing to get the mother's attention. And then the mothers re-engaged and started cooing again and making eye contact, and then the babies resumed eating. So the emotional connection that was reciprocated between a baby and its mother actually serves as kind of a baseline for us that we need on a physical level that type of connection. Same with the university studies across the nation that shows that the social rejection mirrors the same response in our brain and nervous system as does physical trauma. So on a physical level, we have a real intense need for connection with the people around us in this physical world. And on the other side of the same coin, there's this concept of, well, okay, I am actually not, this physical world is not the end of the story. My physical body is definitely something I need to pay attention to, but I also have that emotional intelligence. On the Knowing Show, we talk about these 4 intelligences. So it's physical intelligence, emotional intelligence, intellectual intelligence, but also spiritual intelligence. And so as we're looking at this lesson tonight, I will be still an instant and go home. Why would I choose to stay an instant more where I do not belong when God himself has given me his voice to call me home? And as I'm reading this, I realize that this is kind of having to do with getting a little bit more existential, let's say. But this spiritual intelligence, I want to lean into this tonight, because we don't actually talk too much about spiritual intelligence. But the concept that we have a home, like the core center of our being, our soul and our spirit are nestled right in there. And that spirit is the divine access. It's like the pathway to God. And we have this, and this is a tricky concept. So I hope I can do well articulating this. In the physical world, we have this ability to retreat and go inward, and to kind of come back home to who we are on a spiritual level, and remembering and reclaiming that spiritual sense of peace. You know, there's this concept of the fruit of the Spirit of God living inside of us. The fruit of the Spirit of God is love and joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. There's 9 fruits. And so if I am actually living in accordance with that Spirit of Christ being activated in me, then that's going to be the fruit. So when we talk about this lesson, as it's kind of offering this concept of going home, And so we're positing this question of, well, where do I belong? And so often we think of that looking outward, looking at the world around us, of where do I belong externally? In what group do I belong? With what people? With what sect? With what religion? With what even sports teams? Where do I belong? And there's nothing more exhilarating than all of us cheering, for different World Cup teams. And it was so bonding. And so that sense of belonging is innate. But here's the thing, that even beneath those layers of wanting to belong out there, there's nothing more lonely than sitting alone with ourselves and feeling like we don't belong. So, as we're looking at this concept of, well, where do I belong? It starts with, and underneath, it's like the peeling back at the layers, at the nucleus lies the question of, do we actually feel a sense of belonging in and of ourselves? Do we actually find that sense of peace with the spirit inside of us to have those fruits emanate? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self control. How disconnected are we from the source of life in and of itself, from the presence of God? So, to this question of, well, where do I really belong? Then it begs us and it kind of offers us an opportunity to examine, well, have I been outsourcing my sense of belonging to the world around me? And I don't actually feel like I have a center, a safe place, a place of refuge, even, and a place to return to. And so, what we don't want is what happened to me, where kind of the bottom falls out, and all of a sudden your future's kind of ripped away from you. And then you're wondering, like, okay, actually, I realize now I don't belong because I have not done the work to have that relationship when everything externally falls away, when the physical world gets pulled out from under me. Have I created a place of refuge to internally retreat to and find a semblance of home? After my marriage ended and my husband left, I ended up kind of being a nomad for about 2 years, and just really used that time to travel and to kind of pick myself up out of the ordinary environments that I found myself in. And when I did that and put myself in a new environment, I just found that I was immediately given the opportunity to examine, why am I showing up the way that I am in these new environments? What is that thought process? Where did that come from? Why am I behaving a certain way? How does that behavior tie to a belief system? And so I really was doing a lot of work on coming to know who I was, because I had not just outsourced my belonging, but I had fundamentally outsourced my identity. So I had given effectively everybody around me the power to make claim over who I should be, how to show up in the world, what was my purpose, what was my value. And so over those couple of years, as I started putting myself in these new environments, I also felt very lonely. And in one sense, how can you not? Because you're not around anybody you're not around any of your family. But what I realized throughout that time was that I actually have the opportunity, every single one of us has the opportunity to create a home within. Literally, a place that feels safe, a place to come back to, where no matter where I am physically in the world, I will always be home and at home, because I have come to peace inside with who I am, whose I am, and why I am here. So, who I am, knowing my identity, whose I am, knowing my creator, and having a relationship through the spirit with Christ, and knowing who God is, and knowing what he says to me, and listening and being able to have that ongoing relationship. So the identity is who I am, having that interconnectedness and I guess interrelationship, where I know who I am. So knowing the who, knowing whose, knowing my creator, and then why, having a sense of purpose, so that even though I might not be around my family or be around friends, even people that I know, I have a core internal driver that is constantly pulling me forward, so that no matter where I am in the physical world, I have a sense of home that is constantly with me. Because y'all, if we're outsourcing our home, if we're outsourcing our peace, or outsourcing even our own comfort, our ability to sit in the quiet based on who we're around, man, we are really vulnerable. So while there is a very physical kind of human need that is relationship and connection, and it's good and to be honored and celebrated and pursued, there's also this innate responsibility at the same level that, man, it is up to me to make sure that I am good, that I am bringing home with me, no matter where I find myself in the world, no matter what life throws at me, because otherwise, like I've witnessed for myself and for a few others who are super close to me, if the physical world around us breaks down, what happens then? And let's not wait until it's too late for us to have the loss of the death of a partner, or the loss of a relationship, or the loss even of your own home. But we actually, like these wildfires in Canada, it's destroying so many people's homes. And I was talking with somebody a couple of weeks ago, and they experienced the fires in California. So we just don't know when our physical home, whether it's the person that we physically become attached to, or physical belongings that are taken away from us, the more we're able to establish that internal peace and that internal confidence and relationship with knowing who we are, whose we are, and why we are, the more we're going to be able to bring stability to whatever environment we find ourselves in. Just jumping here into the chat, Brian, I'm so glad to see you. Brian, you are, just for those of you who don't know Brian Crisp, he is the moderator here at The Knowing Show. So thank you, Brian, for being wonderful, and just really grateful for you, my friend. Thank you. Wayne, I'm so glad to see you. You said, where can I really belong? I feel that deeply, especially if you're not wanting, needed, desired, or valued. Why are you there? You know, Wayne, I'm thinking about this concept of, do not throw your pearls before swine. And that is a very, very real thing, where people have gone into rooms, been in relationships where they have not been wanted, to your point, not been wanted, needed, desired, or valued. And as such, they effectively just they're not appreciated. And people don't realize the prize that they have. And I think then it's up to the individual over how then will I continue after I realize that I actually do not belong here. I actually am not wanted. I actually am not desired. And, we have these core wounds. Every single person has a core wound that happened or occurred, or they witnessed, or somehow it impacted them. Usually it was when they were kids, but we all carry some kind of trigger and some kind of wound. And for me, it's not being wanted. And once I realized, oh, that's my core wound, it's been really helpful for me to just be aware of it, because what that means is that I've got an extra sensitivity around that, and things might happen, or people might say things that nobody else would ever take offense at, but it would hit me more personally because of my past. So I need to understand how the past shows up in the present, so that I can basically protect the people that I'm around. And so to that point, every single one of us has to make a decision over, what do I do when I realize that I actually don't belong here? And so going back to this question of, do we know who we are, whose we are, and why we are? To that point, then we get to decide, okay, if I know those three things, then how am I going to engage in this environment, in this dynamic? Am I called to these people? Are they actually people that I need to love on, and that I need to kind of suffer in relationship with for the sake of my calling and of my mission in life? Or do I need to get the hell out of Dodge? Do I actually need to protect and keep sacred who I am, and, my mission and why I'm here? And so I need to actually get out and stop being in such close relationship. But man, I think that that's a really, really important thing for us to consider. Just because we find ourselves in an environment where we're not wanted or we don't belong, what does that say about the other person? What does that say about ourselves even? Maybe they don't want us because we have yet to grow or elevate to that level. That's a very real question. So when we start looking in the mirror in relation to how am I in reaction to these people, or how do they react towards me, there's usually a big giant mirror being held up for us to examine and really consider, okay, what do I have to grow from? What do I have to grow from this? How can I change? And where's just boundaries needed? So just checking back in the in the chat. And Wayne, I just want to acknowledge that's so painful. That's so hard. And so I'm thinking of you, my friend. I not being wanted is one of my, again, kind of one of my core things. So just thinking about you. And I'm curious if anything's been super helpful, as you're kind of recognizing, I think that this is a whole other question of, okay, well, where can I really belong? So doing the work so that we have found that ability to have that engagement with ourselves where, man, I feel like I have a safe place literally in and of myself. I know that I will stand up for myself, because that's part of the reason why we don't feel safe, is because we have never become an advocate and we have self-abandoned in the moments when we've needed ourselves the most. We've judged harshly. We have not shown an extended grace and compassion when that kind of like wounded part is showing up and waving a flag and saying, hey, I need help. Instead of showing compassion and extending kindness like we would for a dear friend, we have shut it up and silenced it. And so that re-engagement and connection with ourselves is so, so, so important. And then from there, okay, well, where do I go to find belonging? I'd actually love to have folks, y'all here in the chat, I'd love to hear from you in terms of where and how have you created real relationship with people in community? What does that look like for you? I have found that, I took myself out dancing a couple weeks ago, and I just went to, it was like a country bar dance where they did line dancing. And I met this 80-year-old man named Wayne, and he was great. And it was so much fun. And I was like, okay, like this is a little place where you can belong for 2 hours. And then, they had this Facebook group and dance club, and it was so fun. And so if we're willing and if we're feeling brave, there are certainly places where we can go belong. But the question is, do we even have that relationship with ourselves to begin with, to know what we like? To even know what does a real ideal community look like that I'm pursuing? Do I want to grow in this regard? Do I want to simply play and have fun? Play is a real value for me. And to be able to go and establish the understanding that, I actually want to go and fill my cup. Well, I know the activities that will get me to be replenished and recharged. I also have found, okay, when I start behaving in a certain way, that's an indicator for me that I actually need to go and pull back from community. So the question again is, do we know ourselves well enough? Do we know ourselves well enough to what you're saying, Wayne, hold up a mirror for other people to kind of pull them up higher in terms of their standards? Do we know ourselves well enough to replenish and restore and rejuvenate our own soul so that when we do show up with other people, we actually have something to give? Because what if we're all just outsourcing our belonging? We're coming from a place of lack and depletion, then nobody has anything to give each other, rather than every single person in the group showing up with something like a full cup and overflow from which to give. And otherwise it is really dangerous. Everyone's then drinking from like an empty cistern, and they're never going to be satisfied, rather than all of us doing the work to fill ourselves up, tend to ourselves, and then come forth and engage in community with really kind of like an open hand and an open heart. Just jumping back here in the chat. Rack the Jipper, hello. Wherever I am, I belong. Man, what confidence. I love that. And I'd be curious, Rack, if you're still here, I'd be curious, how did you kind of learn that mindset and get that approach to life? Like where did that start, and how did you, were you raised with that? Just jumping back here. Goke, hello, good to see you. Blaze says having family dysfunctionalities really screws up a person. Oh gosh. I know what you mean, Blaze. If you're still there, man, having family dysfunctionalities really screws up a person. It's really challenging. It's really challenging when it comes to family and feeling like you don't belong even in your core nucleus. I think that there's something to grieve in that regard. And I actually think that the grieving of that is really, really important because one, you're acknowledging reality in that process, but then two, you're also doing the work to kind of tend to what needs to be healed. And in the acknowledging of reality, in the tending to what needs to be healed, then we can acknowledge over and decide whether I am going to keep pursuing relationship with these people, recognizing it's never going to be what I wanted it to be, and kind of letting go of that ideal and that dream, or create something new. Maybe it's actually a completely new way of engaging with the group or the family, that, or maybe you move away and you create your own. So once we have to acknowledge the reality, and then in acknowledging reality, it's actually potentially grieving what it is not. But Blaze, that hits home. Official TB. G, hello. Ray, hello. Good to see you. Brian, I'm glad you're here. Only Tribal Chels, hello. Good to see you. Christopher Adams, 1 Timothy 6:9 implies we entered this world without anything. So too we will depart in the same manner. That's so good. Thank you for sharing that. OPT Holistic Services, hello. Comic Book Fusion, hi. So good to see you. Daniel Mellor, hello from the UK. I'm hoping to go to you all in October, so hopefully I'll be there. American Redneck, I'm glad you're here. Good to see you. Definitely fear of abandonment. Man, that's a dear friend of mine has that same one too, Wayne. It's so hard, because you're constantly kind of looking for, this is what's interesting. So often our wounds, we actually are looking for reinforcement of, like, we're looking to kind of prove out that it's right. We're constantly searching for proof over our current belief systems. We're looking for the validation that what we believe is true. Just like how when you're expecting it to be a good day, it's probably going to be a good day. And when you're expecting it's not going to be a good day, it's the power of law and attraction. But you're also going to find what you're looking for. So if you're looking for reinforcement over those negative narratives about why nobody loves you, or why you are alone in the world, or how you're never going to end up with somebody, we just self-perpetuate those narratives. And then that's what ends up being our experience. So our core fears, until we recognize them, and until we recognize our core wounds, they're going to probably most likely have power over us. So in acknowledging the reality of whatever it is, that whether it's a core wound or just the reality of our dysfunctions in our families or the areas that we've wanted to belong in, it's acknowledging the reality, feeling what we need to feel. And usually there's a grief that needs to be felt and experienced because it's not how it should have been. Just because it was that way doesn't mean it should have been that way. And especially when those moments and experiences occurred when we were kids and we just didn't have a framework for it, but something felt really off and very wrong, to not process it is really, really damaging. And so now as adults, in processing it and acknowledging the reality of what happened and then processing and feeling whatever it is, that's what gives us the freedom to move on from it. And then we get to decide, okay, what's the action I'm going to take now? So in kind of doing the reconciliation of the past, now we're free to move into the future. Malik, hello. You said you can fill up from community and vice versa. That's so good. Yeah, I love that point. I'm so glad you said that. If we're feeling the lack, maybe community is exactly where we need to go and get that kind of refilling up. I love that. You find what you search for. Also, you can draw into you the negative energy if you're negative. Brando. That's so good. Yeah, y'all, it's like, okay, well, what are we subconsciously looking for? Sometimes I find that I'm looking for that negative experiences to reaffirm my negative belief systems. It's like, why would I meditate and look for things to cause me pain? And it's deeply subconscious usually. But man, once we recognize it, that's why emotional intelligence, the very first step is to become aware, to be aware of, understand, control, and then convey. Those are the 4 steps of emotional intelligence. And then the result is the ability to handle interpersonal relationships with wisdom and with empathy. It's kind of like the reward of emotional intelligence is healthy relationships. You know, it's we actually get to feel seen and feel known and feel loved as a result of doing the work. Y'all, I am going to hop off tonight. I'm heading to bed, but just wanted to thank you all so much for joining. I will be back on tomorrow morning with y'all, and I will see you soon.